I know we've kind of done this dance the past few years. I want to say it really has been a privilege having a dialogue with you. It's always been civil. It's always been cordial. And I really appreciate that. And this is going to be our last time from what I'm understanding on specific, unless we come back if there's some problems. But I really just wanted to tell you, first of all, I appreciate your time and your collegiality on this. So
the respect is mutual.
I did want to ask, and I think I'm a couple areas, because I know there have been some changes from the last bill. There's a couple areas I want to zone in, and if you could just tell me if I'm correct with how I picked up on this. Some of the changes from the previous bill, I know for 2050, in your previous bill, you had 0% of 1990 emissions. And this bill is 15% of 1990 emissions with net zero emissions in all sectors with the offsets. And then the other question I was going to ask is by 2040, it's my understanding it's got to be 100% clean energy sources, non-emission clean energy sources. Is that a pretty fair assessment of what the main changes have been on the bill specifically?
It's pretty close, yes.
That's great. So thank you. So and relative to the Climate Council, it's my understanding there's like 22 reps that are going to be part of that council?
That is correct.
Now, is there any provisions that to have part of that council, members from industry, like, for example, your power plant or your generating plant owners, our utilities who have a say in this, and our manufacturing industry that's going to be impacted by that? Is there a possibility for them to be a part of this discussion as we move forward?
Yes, the appointments, of course, we'll have to see your minority here in the Assembly gets one of those appointments. I can't predict exactly who will be appointed, but once the appointments have been made, there will be working subcommittees.
Okay, very good.
And there are no limits to membership there other than qualifications and sincere interest in solving this problem.
Okay, thank you. From my evaluation of the bill, and I have a question, but I just kind of give you a little background for it first. It seems to me that the bill really puts a lot of focus on the emissions, particularly with the electric generating sector, which is actually only responsible for about a quarter of all emissions when the transportation sector has a higher percentage. So in that regards, with the offsets that are in the bill, it's also my understanding that power plant owners are not eligible to use the offsets. And if we're going to ensure electric system reliability, wouldn't it be best to make sure they were included in that, to use those offsets to make sure they're part of that, so to ensure reliability of the system?
Actually, I don't believe that that is necessary. The offsets are really for industries and activities that we don't have any known technology to immediately address, or that technology is infeasible in the short term. For example, some aspects of the agricultural sector are just extremely difficult to know exactly how to solve some of the emissions issues related to that sector. But we do not have that problem with the direct combustion of fossil fuels. We have alternatives. It's just simply a matter of setting goals and implementing those already known and well-established alternatives.
Okay, great. A couple questions relative to provisions relative to the PSC language and the DEC language. I was going to read one section and the other, and then I just had a question on that. I know the PSC section of the bill allows the PSC to suspend or modify the program if there is a problem with safe and adequate service or a high amount of arrears or service disconnections. The language acts as a safety valve to protect reliability and consumers. But in the DEC section of the regulations for its program, it does not have a provision to suspend or modify the program. Like, wouldn't such an outlet or an off-ramp, wouldn't that be good to have, given the impact and the entities that are involved? So why not have a provision in the DEC regulations like you have in the PSC regulation?
We don't think it's necessary. What we think is necessary is for the Climate Council, with all of the agency heads, to actually emerge from the silos that they circumstantially too often find themselves working within, and have direct and regular communication not only between the agency heads, in this case Public Service Commission and Department of Environmental Conservation, but also with stakeholders from the community, from many of the communities around the state. That direct interaction, we believe, is a formula for solving problems.
Okay, great. I know in the bill memo it says the fiscal impact is going to be determined. Is there an estimate of the costs of implementing this? Is what it's going to be? I have an estimate from a study that I want to share with you in a little bit, but do we know what the expectation of the cost is going to be? And also, will there be, how much money is there going to be market-based compliance regulations to generate? Could this possibly lead to a carbon tax or something of that line?
Well, that's certainly not the intent. We didn't write that into the bill. I would like to say, though, that in terms of the first part of your multi-part question, do we have estimates? Not at this time. We don't know that the estimates of cost would be for replacing. We can see that as part of the report that we've asked for from the Climate Working Group. And indeed, we do know what the cost of not going forward with this type of initiative is. Just to give you some idea, in the last year, 2018, Hurricanes Michael and Florence combined for $49 billion in damage. And the western wildfires are estimated to have cost $24 billion. We have similar numbers from Superstorm Sandy,
right,
that have been visited upon our state. The cost of not doing something is also difficult to be precise with, even now, several years later, but we do know that we lost more than 50 lives in New York.
Sure. I can understand your point, what you're bringing up. The study that I saw, well, it was from what I read about, is an economist from the University of Massachusetts and a supporter of the CCPA. He estimated, I guess from the reports that I read, it would require an investment of $8.7 billion per year to hit the New York State renewable targets based on the provisions in this bill. Is that a fair estimate?
I would yield to your calculation, not having calculations myself, but again would just underscore that the cost of inaction far exceeds the investments that we need to make, as opposed to referring to those as costs. I would refer to those as things that, if we achieve them, will be through structured and thoughtful investment that will have many benefits, including new jobs, as well as better health outcomes for our citizens.
That's fair. I know when we talked about this issue in the past, the concerns I brought up, and I think you appreciated where I was coming from, not that didn't think there's issues that needed to be addressed and we shouldn't be aggressive about it. It's just my perception of us trying to do something as a state and doing it alone. And so one of the things I wanted to ask, maybe, or if you agree, when we've talked about this issue in the past, if we were to take all carbon emissions in New York State, what we relate to, that for our carbon emissions in New York State as a percentage of the U.S. total carbon emissions is 3.3%, and our carbon emissions in New York as a percentage of the world's global emissions is 0.5%. Would you agree with that assessment as far as what we've been told?
I would agree. However, I would also go just a little further. New York isn't just any place. New York was the place that was the first capital of our nation. New York was the place where the British, who tried to suppress the creation of our nation, located themselves in New York City. New York is the place that sent more soldiers to the Civil War to save our Union than all of the other states combined. All you have to do to see the leadership of the state is go downstairs in this building. All of those regimental battle flags, some with bullet holes, some with blood, testify to the importance of New York State in the history and destiny of our nation.
Sure.
And so this is a quest that is not limited to our state, and looking at it through the lens of the relatively small percent that we are of the rest of the nation almost misses the point. The point is New York needs to lead. This is the Empire State. This is arguably the most important of all the states. It is, from the very beginning of our nation's time, the most important state.
Fair enough. I know when we talked about this issue before, we've talked about the issue of carbon leakage. And I'm just going to kind of give you an example, and maybe if you just tell me if you agree, as far as if this would be an example of what people might refer to when the industry cannot comply with the mandate or it's too costly. Say, for example, high-intensity energy users in manufacturing, agriculture, trucking industry, our auto industry, electric generating facilities. So if they are having trouble financially, and I know we talked about this, it's more than just this. There's other factors that come into play, like property taxes, and I'll talk about that in a second. But if they take all that into account, and this is one aspect of that, and they move to another state, they move nearby at Ohio or Pennsylvania, and then they don't have the same restrictions that we might have here, and then you have more emissions, which basically have more carbon emissions going into the atmosphere than what we have now based on where we have been going. Would that be kind of just an example of what we refer to as carbon leakage?
It would be.
Okay, great.
We have that term defined more precisely in the language of this measure. We anticipate that this is part of the array of problems that we inevitably need to confront. You are correct to point out that this is a puzzle. I don't think that was your word, but certainly you laid out how complex it is, and I think that the word fits.
And I know when we debated, because I looked before, it's more than just that, but that's just one aspect. Because if you take, I think I'm concerned about is we have almost like a perfect storm here in New York. You know, when you look at our business climate, we're always 49th or 50th. We have the highest property taxes in the country, 79th highest in higher percent of the national average. Our income taxes, our workers' compensation costs, our utility costs. You take that in context with these mandates on the electric generating sector and other industries, then you have this restrictor mandate, and then we lose our manufacturers and our farmers and our trucking and our car dealers and our airports. They move to another state, and that's where you have that emission. This is just one of those examples that I'm concerned about, and that's, are you saying that the council is going to work to address that issue? Because I'm concerned
that the council is going to work to address that issue, but I'll go further. I believe that in so doing, that we will create thousands of new jobs. We will create a new sense of optimism within some of the communities of our state, which coincidentally are environmental justice communities that are places where there are concentrations of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions that are unusually high, that are places that have suffered from asthma and lung disease, and we have an opportunity to make our cities stronger. We have an opportunity to make our citizens healthier. We have an opportunity to create an environment that is attractive. So while you may look, and I'm not saying that you look at the glass as half empty, it's half something. I believe that if we all get our creative energies that have propelled New York into the global leader that it is economically, if we keep that invested into, that we will have indeed a glass that is half full and being filled even more.
Fair enough, and I always appreciate your optimism and that positive attitude. I'm taking a little dimmer approach on the legislation as an impact, but that's fair enough, and I appreciate that viewpoint. One thing, we all want to reduce carbon emissions in the state and in our country, and I know your bill specifically says 100% carbon-free from electric generating capacity, but isn't it a fact that over the past 15 years we have reduced carbon emissions, and one of the primary reasons for that is the use of natural gas that has been implemented. The New York Independent System Operators has verified that. The use of natural gas coming into play, getting rid of dirty oil boilers and oil generating capacity, and what we're doing in the city. I know when I visited a few years ago, we went and saw how they're replacing oil boilers in the city and they're replacing them with natural gas. That's a positive thing for the environment. Isn't that one of the things that has helped reduce the carbon emissions, the involvement of natural gas?
That's arguable.
Yes, I again want to thank the sponsor for this time, the debate. The goal is laudable. I appreciate the debate. And I just want my colleagues to know, just because we have concerns and disagreements on this legislation, this bill, and its implementation, does not mean we do not want to take action to address climate change and this, taking proper steps and adding renewables to our system. I believe the issue for me and for a number of us is with this bill is New York really going at it alone. Is there balance and how this is balanced? And I'm concerned that if we do go alone, we won't achieve our goal. And what we'll do is we'll completely dismantle our economy and way of life along the way. This bill only impacts New York. This issue needs to be addressed globally. China, Russia, India, Brazil needs to be a part of the solution. And I know the Congresswoman from the Queens thinks the United States, it can't just be the United States just doing it alone either. It needs to be done globally. It can't just be all on New York, and it can't just be all done on the United States of America. When we talked about the emissions in New York, globally, New York, our emissions, our CO2 emissions, carbon emissions are only 0.5% of the total global emissions and 3.3% of the United States emissions. And we talked about the issue of carbon leakage and that issue. So when we put these more restrictions just on New York, just on ourselves, it's going to impact our businesses, it's going to impact our farms, it's going to impact our electric generating capacity. And what we're going to do is, I'm concerned is, and many of us are concerned, we're going to destroy manufacturing, we're going to destroy farming, we're going to destroy jobs, and we're really not going to get the impact we want because we're not a big part of the total global emissions, or like I said, just 0.5%. And again, there's that risk of carbon leakage when businesses, manufacturers, farmers, whatever it may be, go to other states with less restrictions, and then the carbon emissions go up. So we aren't really addressing the concern that we want. I know this issue is talked about being the new Green Deal for New York. And from my perspective, yes, there's green in this deal, but it's also, when I see it's the green, the dollars it's going to cost all of us, and lost jobs, business, industry, higher utility costs, higher taxes, skyrocketing retrofitting costs of homes and businesses. Just some of the statistics, let me read to you. Again, I mentioned it earlier. An economist from the University of Massachusetts, a supporter of the CCPA, estimated it would require an investment of $8.7 billion per year just to hit New York's renewables. There's another study done saying the cost of residential conversion with capital costs for appliances and everything would cost each household approximately $58,500. An analysis of the tax hikes for the average residential customers, $300 to $440 per year. For commercial and industrial customers, it could be up to $4,300 per year. 1,000 different businesses, 40,000 jobs, $2.6 billion in wages from energy-intensive trade-exposed industries, including manufacturing, sawmills, iron and steel mills, foundries, and paper mills would be in jeopardy. 2.1 million small businesses and the 4.1 million jobs they provide would be threatened by higher energy costs, the cost of equipment, and the cost of retrofitting. Mr. Speaker, my colleagues, when I talk about our energy policy, when I talk to groups, when I talk to people, it needs to be balanced. Just like your own IRA or 401k, you don't put all your assets into one investment. You don't just put it all into stocks. You don't just put it all into bonds or cash. You diversify it to make sure it's protected and strong. We should be doing the same thing with our energy portfolio. I often refer to it as like a three-legged stool. You need three legs for the stool to stand. And yes, clean, my colleagues, is an important part. That's one of those legs. But also is reliability, and affordability. And our renewables, in and of themselves, are not reliable for our system. They need conventional means to back up. And certainly, we need affordable, so our people can afford to live here and to have jobs here and have small businesses here. This bill certainly hits the clean, but it misses the point on the two other ones. So if you only have one leg, it can't stand, it can't work. That's why I don't think this is going to work. I'm a supporter of wind, solar, and hydro. That needs to be a part of the portfolio, but so does nuclear and, yes, natural gas, I believe. I'm very concerned about the heavy focus on the electricity generating sector. Again, we need to have reliability in our electric generating system. And again, renewables are good, but they still need that conventional backup to provide that reliability to the system. I think this threatens the reliability of that system. So all of that coupled with the concern relative to the loss of jobs, the loss of industry or farms, the billions of dollars in taxes, fees, and assessments on our energy consumption, and retrofits for our homes, our businesses, our manufacturers, all of these things, Mr. Speaker, is why I have concerns, the concerns I've been voicing tonight and will continue to voice. And it's those concerns and those reasons that I share with you is why I will be opposing this legislation here tonight and why I urge my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.